Greetings. In this video, you will hear the most interesting and scary 3 horror stories. I publish stories every day, so if you like these stories, you can subscribe so you don't lose my channel. Enjoy watching. The Mirror of Hades. It was an old, faded photograph that caught Emma's eye. She had been browsing through dusty antiques in a forgotten corner of a secondhand store when it seemed to glimmer under the dim light, almost calling out to her. The photograph depicted a strange, ornate mirror, its dark, intricate frame wrapped in unknown symbols, and the look of reverence on the faces of the people around it. But what truly struck her was the look in their eyes, a mixture of awe and fear, as if they were too terrified to look away. The shopkeeper, an elderly man with gray, beady eyes, noticed Emma's fixation on the picture. He shuffled closer, his wrinkled hand resting on the counter. "You're interested in the Mirror of Hades, aren't you?" he asked in a low, raspy voice. Emma blinked, startled. "The what?" "The Mirror of Hades," the man repeated, nodding. "It's been passed down through generations. An old relic, cursed." He trailed off as if lost in thought. Emma wasn't sure whether she should ask more questions or simply walk away. There was something about the man's unsettling tone that made her skin crawl. But curiosity won out. "What's the story behind it?" she asked. The shopkeeper took a slow, deliberate breath, as though preparing to share something ancient and forbidden. "The mirror," he began, "was once part of an ancient Greek temple, owned by a high priest who was said to have been in contact with the gods themselves. Some say it held the power to show the future. Others say it could reveal the deepest secrets of the soul. But those who dared to gaze into its depths found themselves drawn into a madness from which they could never escape." He paused, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that sent a chill down Emma's spine. The last known owner of the mirror was a woman named Helena. She found the mirror in an old estate, much like you found it now. At first, she was entranced by its beauty. But after a week of owning it, strange things started happening. Objects moved by themselves. She heard whispers in the night, voices from the mirror. She tried to destroy it, but the mirror resisted every attempt. Emma felt a tightening in her chest as the man's words sank in. "Helena's life became a nightmare," the shopkeeper continued. "No matter where she went, she felt the mirror's presence. It was as though it was calling her, drawing her in. She went mad, just like everyone else who'd come before her. And when they found her body, she was clutching the mirror, her last breath drawn in a smile, as if she had finally found the answer." Emma was gripped by a strange mixture of fascination and dread. She had never believed in curses or supernatural forces, but the way the shopkeeper spoke, she felt an eerie, magnetic pull toward the mirror, as though it was calling to her. She couldn't resist. "I'll take it," Emma said, her voice trembling slightly. The shopkeeper smiled a thin, knowing smile, and without another word, he wrapped the mirror carefully in brown paper and handed it to her. The moment she got it home, Emma felt the change. Her apartment, once comforting and familiar, suddenly seemed strange. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of the lights, sent a shiver down her spine. But it wasn't until she placed the mirror on the mantel that things began to change in earnest. As she stood in front of it, admiring its intricate carvings, she felt a pull, a strange desire to look deeper. The surface of the mirror seemed to ripple slightly, like the surface of a calm pond disturbed by a breeze. When she leaned closer, she thought she saw something dark moving behind her reflection. Her heart raced, but she couldn't look away. Her hand moved almost involuntarily toward the mirror, fingertips brushing the cold glass. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She kept hearing faint whispers, too low to be real, but loud enough to keep her awake. Her mind was plagued with strange, vivid dreams of ancient temples, dark shadows, and the image of a woman with hollow eyes staring at her from the depths of the mirror. Over the next few days, things only got worse. She began seeing things, figures standing at the edges of her vision, just out of reach. Sometimes they would whisper her name. The whispers would wake her in the middle of the night, and when she opened her eyes, she would see the reflection of someone else standing beside her in the mirror. But no one was there when she turned around. It wasn't long before Emma's friends began to notice the change in her. She became withdrawn, nervous, constantly glancing over her shoulder. Her laughter seemed forced, her eyes sunken. They asked if she was all right, if something was wrong, but she just smiled weakly and said it was nothing. One evening, Emma decided she needed to get rid of the mirror. She couldn't live with it any longer. But when she tried to move it, she found it wouldn't budge. She pulled and tugged at the heavy frame, but it felt as though something inside was holding it in place. In a fit of panic, she threw the mirror against the wall, hoping to shatter it into 1,000 pieces. The moment it hit the ground, a deafening, otherworldly screech filled the air, and the entire room seemed to tremble. The mirror cracked, but instead of shattering into fragments, the crack spread, swirling like a dark abyss. Emma backed away, her eyes wide with horror. A shape began to emerge from the depths of the mirror, a shadowy, shifting figure. She couldn't move. Her body felt paralyzed, her mind racing as the figure stepped forward. It was the woman from her dreams, the woman with hollow eyes. The figure reached out a hand toward her, and Emma's scream was swallowed by the darkness. The Cursed Book of Avelon. It was an old, leather-bound book that arrived in the mail one rainy afternoon. The package was nondescript, the handwriting on the label barely legible. At first, Derek thought it was a mistake, a book he had not ordered. But when he opened it and saw the title on the cover, his curiosity took over. The Cursed Book of Avelon. The name sounded vaguely familiar, like a piece of a long-forgotten myth, but Derek couldn't place it. As a collector of rare and obscure books, he had seen many strange titles in his time, but this one felt different. It had a weight to it, not just in the physical sense, but in a deeper, more unsettling way. The book's cover was adorned with intricate symbols, runes that seemed to shift when he looked at them too long. It had the faintest odor of mildew and decay, as though it had been lying untouched for centuries. Derek's fingers tingled as he reached for it, unable to resist the pull of its mysterious aura. He opened the book to the first page, his eyes scanning the text. At first, the words seemed innocuous enough. Tales of an ancient order, their rituals, and the dark magic they practiced. But as he read on, something began to change. The words didn't seem to make sense, shifting before his eyes. Phrases appeared and disappeared in the blink of an eye, and the margins of the pages were filled with strange symbols that looked like they had been scrawled in blood. He shook his head, trying to clear the fog from his mind. It must have been some sort of elaborate prank. Someone had altered the text, playing with his senses. But as he continued reading, something more sinister began to take root in his mind. The book was not just recounting the history of the Order of Avalon. It was alive, drawing him into its story, blurring the line between reality and fiction. The more he read, the more his thoughts became clouded. Strange visions began to appear before his eyes. Images of shadowy figures, robed in black, standing in a circle, chanting in a language he couldn't understand. He saw flashes of fire, of bodies writhing in pain, of an ancient temple hidden deep within a forbidden forest. The book spoke of an ancient curse, one that bound the souls of the Order's victims to the pages, trapping them in an eternal prison of ink and paper. As Derek read, he could feel something creeping inside him, like a parasite slowly taking root in his mind. The book was more than just words. It was a gateway, a door to something far darker, something ancient and malevolent. That night, Derek tried to put the book down. He forced himself to close it and place it on the shelf, hoping to forget about it. But when he turned off the light and lay in bed, he heard the whispers. At first, they were soft, just barely audible murmurs in the dark. But as the hours passed, they grew louder, more insistent. It was as though the voices were calling to him, beckoning him to open the book again. He could hear them now, clear as day, their words full of malice and anger. Derek tried to block out the voices, but they followed him everywhere. In his dreams, he saw the figures from the book, the robed figures, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. They surrounded him, chanting in a language that felt like it was burning into his soul. He woke up each night drenched in sweat, his heart racing, the whispers still echoing in his ears. It wasn't long before Derek became obsessed. He couldn't stop reading the book. Every time he closed it, the whispers grew louder, more desperate. He began to lose track of time. Days blurred into nights, and soon he could barely remember what it felt like to live in the real world. The book consumed him, its dark power seeping into his every thought. One evening, he opened the book once more, and this time, the words seemed to shift before his eyes. They rearranged themselves, forming a new sentence, one that he had not read before. "You have released us, Derek." His heart skipped a beat. He stumbled backward, the book falling from his hands. The air grew cold around him, and the room seemed to darken, as though the light itself was being sucked into the pages. He heard the sound of footsteps behind him, slow and deliberate. He turned, but there was no one there. The whispers grew louder, now a cacophony of voices all speaking at once. They filled the room, overwhelming him, drowning out all other sound. He fell to his knees, clutching his head, unable to escape the relentless chanting. And then, from the shadows, they emerged. The figures from the book, twisted, skeletal shapes, their faces contorted in agony, slowly stepped into the light. Their eyes were black voids, and as they approached, the temperature in the room dropped to freezing. Derek tried to scream, but no sound came from his throat. He tried to run, but his legs refused to move. He was paralyzed, trapped in the grip of the curse. One of the figures reached out, its cold, bony hand brushing his cheek. He could feel the chill of death seep into his very soul. "You are ours now," it whispered, its voice like the scraping of nails on a chalkboard. The last thing Derek saw before the darkness consumed him was the book, lying open on the floor. The pages turned by themselves, as if the book were feeding off his terror, growing stronger with each passing moment. The cursed Book of Avelon had claimed another victim, the Jade Necklace of Sorrows. Anna had always been drawn to the strange and beautiful. She collected antiques, old clocks, dusty paintings, tarnished silverware, and each item she owned held a story. One afternoon, while visiting a secluded antique market in a hidden alley, she found something that made her heart race with excitement. a jade necklace unlike anything she had ever seen. It was displayed in a small glass case, resting on a velvet cushion. The jade stone was deep green, almost black, with veins of gold that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. The chain was made of delicate silver links, but it was the pendant that drew Anna's attention. It was shaped like an eye, its hollow center filled with what appeared to be a swirling mist, as if the stone itself contained an endless, shifting void. When she inquired about the necklace, the vendor, a gaunt man with pale, sunken eyes, told her that it was an ancient artifact, said to have been crafted by a long-lost civilization. This necklace, he explained in a whisper, is known as the Jade Necklace of Sorrows. It has been passed down through generations, but always at a terrible cost. Anna was intrigued but skeptical. What kind of cost? The vendor leaned closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Those who wear it, they're never the same. They say the necklace feeds off their sorrow, their regrets. And when it is worn by someone with a heavy heart, it gives them visions, terrible, haunting visions. People who wear it often fall into madness or die in mysterious ways. Anna wasn't sure she believed the old man's tale, but there was something undeniable about the necklace. It called to her, and she couldn't resist its allure. Without a second thought, she purchased the necklace and placed it around her neck. The first night she wore it, Anna felt a strange sensation, a tightness around her throat, as though the jade was slowly constricting. But when she looked in the mirror, the necklace seemed to glow with an unnatural light, its swirling mist growing more intense. Her reflection looked different, her face paler, her eyes darker. It was as though the necklace was pulling something from within her, feeding off her emotions. As the days passed, Anna's nightmares grew worse. She began to see flashes of faces, people she didn't recognize, twisting in agony, their eyes wide with fear. She would wake up in cold sweats, her heart pounding, unable to shake the images. The visions came even when she was awake. She would catch glimpses of shadows in the corners of her eyes, figures moving just out of reach, and the sensation of being watched, always watched. It wasn't just the nightmares or the strange visions. Anna began to feel a gnawing emptiness inside her, a crushing weight that made it impossible to breathe. The necklace seemed to amplify her sadness, her guilt. Memories of past mistakes, of people she had wronged, of things left unsaid, haunted her at every turn. The more she wore the necklace, the more the weight of her regrets consumed her. One evening, as she sat alone in her apartment, staring at her reflection in the mirror, something happened. The swirling mist within the jade pendant began to move violently, as though it were alive. The air grew thick and suffocating, and a dark shape seemed to form in the mist. Anna's breath caught in her throat as the shape became clearer. A figure, tall and shadowy, standing right behind her in the mirror. The figure's face was obscured by darkness, but its eyes were bright, burning with an intense, malevolent glow. It reached out toward her, its fingers long and skeletal, brushing the surface of the glass. And then, to her horror, it began to speak. "Anna," it whispered, its voice a cold, echoing hiss. "You are not alone." The necklace began to pulse, its jade stone throbbing in time with her heartbeat. Anna's hands trembled as she reached for her neck, desperate to tear the necklace off. But when she touched the pendant, it burned her skin, leaving red marks like the scars of an ancient, forgotten fire. The figure in the mirror began to move closer, its shadow stretching across the room, swallowing the light. Its voice grew louder, more insistent. "You cannot escape. We will always be with you." Panicking, Anna stumbled backward, her mind spinning with fear. She tried to take off the necklace, but it was as if it was fused to her skin, its power binding her to it. Her body trembled, and for a moment, she thought she might lose her mind entirely. The necklace was feeding on her sorrow, but it was also changing her. It was no longer just a relic. It had become a part of her, and it was driving her to the edge of madness. The next morning, Anna awoke with the taste of metal in her mouth and a deep sense of dread. The necklace was still around her neck, and she couldn't remember taking it off. She had no memory of the previous night, of the figure in the mirror or the terrible whispers. But one thing was certain. She could feel it now, a presence within her mind, a darkness that was slowly growing stronger. Anna's world started to unravel. She would see people, strangers, staring at her with hollow, empty eyes, as though they could see something inside her that she couldn't escape. Her reflection, too, began to change. It was no longer her own. There was something else in the mirror, something watching her, something hungry. The necklace had claimed her, and Anna knew, deep down, that there was no way out. It had taken everything from her, the light in her eyes, the warmth in her heart, the hope that once filled her soul, and now it was taking her very life. The jade necklace had not just cursed her. It had bound her to the sorrow of those who had worn it before, and to the endless, tormenting spirits that had been trapped within it for centuries. One night, in a fit of desperation, Anna tried to destroy the necklace. She took a hammer to the jade, smashing it against the stone floor. But instead of shattering, the pendant absorbed the impact, and a dark energy surged through her body. She screamed in agony as her vision blurred, the room spinning around her. The jade stone flickered, and in its depths, she saw the faces of the people who had worn it before, faces twisted in pain, their mouths open in silent screams. Anna's last breath was drawn with a smile, a twisted, knowing smile. She was no longer herself. The necklace had consumed her entirely, and now, as the jade swirled and pulsed with new life, it waited for its next victim.